appears regularly in front of the U.S. Court of Claims as well as the Armed Services Board of Contract Appeals, and has litigated several dredge claims to a successful resolution. His talk will focus on lessons learned from other dredge claims and how dredge contractors can best protect the right to be paid for unanticipated increased costs that often occur during dredging contracts. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Katz to give his presentation on dredge contract claims, experience from the trenches.
Everybody, thank you, and I will try and make up the lost time. I call this talk Experience from the Trenches. Besides the obvious, the channel itself being a trench, a dredge operation is there's zero to very little visibility. You've got your interface, what tells you what's beneath there, but it's really just purple dots and pink dots, and it's not. You don't actually know what's going on down there as you're dredging it. If it's going on at night, you've got the obvious life safety concern all the time. You've got personnel in the water, on the beach. If you're in open waters, ocean condition, it's even more so. So the kind of the split-second decisiveness that's necessary during a dredge operation is akin to kind of trench warfare in that respect. We've got how do I do this? There we go. Okay. What are the arrows? The arrows, yeah. So what is a contract claim ultimately? A contract claim is contractor seeking additional money. At the end of the day, it could be time as well, but for the most part, it's time and money together. Very rarely is time requested without compensation. So ultimately, a contract claim is a claim for additional money on account of something going on that was unforeseen, that was changed, unanticipated, a changed condition. The claims are governed pretty strictly by the Contract Disputes Act and the FAR and the DFARS. What is dredging, right? So we all know what dredging is, but taking what ultimately is going to be a Wikipedia definition is going to help us to understand where the claims are found, where we could locate the claims, and how we can know that at the time. Wikipedia says that dredging is the form of excavation carried out underwater or partially underwater in shallow waters or ocean waters. We'll get into its purpose of navigation and coastal protection. But right away, excavation, underwater, ocean water. To me, and to everybody, that should immediately flag excavation. You've got rock, you've got debris, you've got cobbles, gravel. Did the boring log say it would be soft sand and silt, and ultimately you're pulling up cobbles and gravel? If so, that's a different site condition. That's something different than you anticipated. You anticipated soft, malleable sand or clay, and you've got larger material that's damaging the equipment, that's taking more time, etc. Is it maintenance work? Is it new work? Is it a combination of the two? And did the specifications say there would be new work in a maintenance job or vice versa? Underwater flags the obvious that there's low to zero visibility, there's unforeseen conditions, there's life like we've just heard. There's a lot of life underneath that water, under the surface of that water. And what are those conditions, and what is the protection that can become necessary mid-project that maybe wasn't clear in the beginning? And then ocean water, we've got obviously storm and just ocean conditions depending on the weather. So a typical, this is very different than ground-up construction where you see what you're doing. Here you've got, there's stuff going on that you just don't know what's there. Purpose for open navigation, coastal protection, and then transporting the sediment elsewhere. Some factors that come to mind are the channel traffic, the ongoing port activities, what else is happening, is it a busy shipping port, is there a lot of private kind of docks and recreational vehicles that have to be accounted for and protected. The coastal protection, there was a lot of talk this morning about beneficial use. What's become a common beneficial use is the renourishment of a nearby beach. And then you've got coastal protections that have to keep in mind, and in addition to taking the sediment out of the channel, you've got essentially a whole other project, which could be a beach renourishment, or whatever the beneficial use is, that often is not paid for separately, right? That's got to be included within the cubic yard price, cubic yard quantity price. So there isn't a separate compensation for the coastal protection or the beneficial use typically. Right, this is the medieval river or port, very busy, a lot of factors going on there, a busy commercial shipping port, and how much more so is there that you've got to look out for. The elements of the fixed price bid for maintenance, dredging, whereas a government building that's going up will have many, many different line items to it. Your typical dredge project has about 3: mobilization, demobilization, often combined into one, cubic yard quantity price, and then sometimes there's adds or alternates. So oftentimes we just have the 2: mob, demob, and cubic yard quantity. The legal avenues that are available, I talk about them as being 4 approaches: 2 statutory and 2 common law, 2 judge-made. The 2 statutory ones that are most common are the differing site conditions clause and the changes clause, and then the Spearin doctrine is a doctrine we heard about this morning, earlier this session, this is that Supreme Court law that's over 100 years old, and contra preferentum, which is that we'll get into that as we move along. Notification of changes, right, requires, the change clause of the FAR requires prompt notice of any conduct that the contractor regards as a change. So the important, I guess, factor here, and one of my themes, is that the contractor is in the driver's seat, because you could have, in a dredge situation at least, building that's going up, sometimes the government or wherever the owner is will want a new floor added, will want to move the bathrooms from the east end to the west end or vice versa, and then there's costs for that change. The FAR doesn't say that it's only when the owner wants to change that's what a change is. It's any conduct that the contractor happens upon that is going to be a change to the originally drawn, originally spec'd work. And in a dredge situation, very rarely, right, the government will have a quality control person or known as rep there, but at the end of the day, it's the contractor who's noticing the conditions, who's really in the trenches, so to say, who's at the front lines, and it's the contractor that's going to know about conduct that is a change. And again, the really change here refers to additional cost, because if there's no additional cost, or there's no additional time, so then just deal with the change, and it's not an issue. Oftentimes, so what the courts have come up with over the years is a doctrine called the constructive change, because a change typically is when, like we just talked about, is if the owner makes a change to the plans and gives a change order to affect that change. If the impact of something going on, a direction to do it this way, not that way, if that has a cost impact, then it really becomes a constructive change. And the contractors and their lawyers have to become adept at noticing what's a constructive change. What's a change here that's going to, at the end of the day, impact the bottom line, which is going to increase the costs, and what can I do in real time to protect my rights to make that claim, both in terms of notice and in terms of tracking the costs of this particular instruction or this particular change in circumstances that is going to lead to additional funds. In this case, this is a case of mine. This past summer, the Armed Services Board of Contract Appeals gave a decision on entitlement. I think it's one of the most groundbreaking dredge decisions in recent history. It's a 74-page decision, and it goes factor by factor what may have been what seemed like a run-of-the-mill dredge contract. Not even that much quantity, about 118 cubic yards, 118,000 cubic yards in the Scarborough River up in Maine. What made it just a virtual impossibility to actually make happen. One of the factors was this wall, this seawall that was being built. Just beyond there is a golf course. So this is a private, the wall is built on private property, built by the golf course, and it was built to coincide with the dredge operation, unbeknownst to the contractor, and the fact is unbeknownst to the Corps of Engineers as well, until one day the truck showed up to build this wall. And this wall impacted the contractor's space, in which he had. This was also a beach renourishment job where the beach was built up by about 6 feet. It was supposed to be built up by about 6 feet. Ultimately, the sand, the beach, covers this wall. It becomes underneath the public beach. But this is mid-construction. And what began to happen was that the scour from the pump, from the pipeline, continually, particularly at high tide, continued to underscore that wall, and the pump had to be shut down, the equipment had to be shut down and re-diverted, because otherwise that wall would fall into the sea. Every time there was high tide and dredge activity was going on, that wall, if the dredge activity continued, that wall would fall into the sea. There was no toe, there was no footings to hold it up otherwise. The contractor did not realize at the time that that would be a very significant change to their contract. And they continued to try and make it happen, and ultimately the board did find that the direction from the Corps to protect that wall was a constructive change to the contract, and there's going to be a decision on entitlement, a decision on quantity, right, on how much of a change that's going to be. As one example, just this morning and this afternoon, we've heard plenty of examples. A sunken barge, marine life, unanticipated perhaps marine life, anything really that increases the cost to a contractor and/or the time, because time ultimately is a cost factor as well, can be utilized and can be harnessed as a change claim or a constructive change claim. But what it does require is a vigilant outlook so that these changes are being caught or being recognized in real time, and not only in hindsight, because if it's only in hindsight, what you've failed to provide then is notice to the government of your increased costs and an opportunity for the government to stem those or to deal with the condition on their own. An opportunity to mitigate has to be provided before that claim can be actionable. So throughout, an executive of the contractor has to know the basic things that can become a claim and how to protect the rights to make those claims. The next most common is differing site conditions. The same thing. This is going to require notice to the owner of any condition, physical condition, which differs from the condition indicated in the drawings. A recent case, I believe this was out of Florida as well, that oyster beds and shell crusts were held by the board to be a different site condition, and this is when the geotech survey showed a zero glow count material, and ultimately they were hitting these shell bars, and of course they had to protect these oyster beds, which led to time and costs. So that's a different site. It's not a change necessarily, but it's a different site condition from what the contract, from what the specifications indicated would be beneath the water. United States versus Spearman. So those are the two primary statutory mechanisms for claims: the changes, which can also include constructive changes, and different site conditions. It doesn't end there though, because in both of these situations, there's interpretation that's necessary to determine, do we have a differing site condition, do we have a change, and that's what courts and judges do. In 1918, the Supreme Court came up with what's called the Spearman Doctrine, and that doctrine says that when the government issues a set of plans, they also issue a warranty on those plans that says if you build it, it will work, and or if you follow through these plans and specifications, you'll reach the outcome we're asking you to achieve. And if it doesn't achieve that, or if you have to add more time or more money or more effort to make it achieve the results we're asking for, then there's compensation due for that, because we have warranted that these plans will lead to this result, and if it doesn't do so, we, the government, are responsible for the extra costs in making it happen. And in contrast, when a set of plans fails to reach the outcome, it's called defective, and a defective plans and specifications, the effect of a defective specification can be very broad, can entitle a contractor really to a very vast menu of compensation depending on the particular circumstances. It's just important to know that if the plan says something and ultimately it's not achievable, that's a claim right there. Contra preferentum, Latin for against the offerer. It's a long-established doctrine of interpretation that says when the government issues a set of plans, then the interpretation of those plans will be construed against the government insofar as your interpretation is reasonable. Reasonable means that a like-minded person, a reasonable person, might come to that conclusion, and so long as you have a reasonable interpretation, the contractor has a reasonable interpretation of the plans, even if that's different than the intent of the government at the time, then the contractor's interpretation will govern. The takeaways that I always come out with in any situation is document, document, document. The more documentation, the better documentation, then the better the claim will be. This would include pre-bid documentation. This includes an estimate sheet that clearly sets forth the contractor's interpretations of specific provisions, that they went to the site, what they found to be at the site, or what they didn't find, right? In an underwater condition, you've got a document that you went there and you didn't see the condition under the water. And sometimes this includes just documenting to the file interpretations that were made, like we said, and obtaining estimates so that we know market conditions of what it would cost to get the government's plans executed. And then post-bid documentation is really the most important area. Detailed daily logs that include weather, any kind of obstructions, debris, unanticipated cobbles, extraordinary repairs, cost code segregation. You can have a claim, but ultimately if you haven't recorded the costs of those claims, then you're still not going to be able to recover because you don't have proof that the change translated into this amount of extra cost. So you've got to have cost segregation where there's recordings of all the extra costs. Even successful projects need to be tracked because we have what's called the measure mile, the way to gain costs on problem jobs is a comparative study to the successful jobs. So how much longer this took, how much more this took, so you've got to have the data from both types of jobs. Ultimately, it's a question of working with your lawyer, with your accountant, to identify problem areas. If you can work with your professional service providers in real time, then you can be assured you protected yourself as best as you can. Thank you very much.
Okay, we have time for one question. So, anybody has a question?